There are two flower pots sitting outside a trailer in East Tennessee. Small ones, terracotta. You've probably driven past 100 just like them and never looked twice. Except these two have been sitting in the middle of one of the strangest unsolved cases in the country for 5 years now. Because, and I didn't know this until I actually looked closely at the footage, there are no flowers in them. Just dirt, packed down hard, almost like concrete. A couple of cactus plants. Some rocks, that's it. That's the garden. And the reason that matters, or the reason I'm even bringing up two empty flower pots on a porch, is because the official story of what happened to 5-year-old Summer Wells starts right there. With gardening, with grandma, with flowers that, as far as anyone can actually see on camera, never existed. I want to be upfront about something before we go further. I'm not here to relitigate the whole case today. If you've watched anything about Summer Wells before, you already know the outline. She vanished from her home in Hawkins County, Tennessee back in June of 2021. She was 5, and 5 years later, nobody's been arrested, nobody's been charged, and there's still no answer. You know that part. What I want to do instead is slow way down on one specific piece of this. Just one, because I think it's been sitting there in plain sight for years, and somehow, almost nobody's actually stopped to walk through it carefully. And that's the story of what Grandma was doing that afternoon, because there are two versions of it. Two different people telling it two different ways, and they don't line up at all. So let's just sit with that for a minute and actually go through it. A little context first, because I think it matters. A few weeks after Summer disappeared, this would have been around July of 2021, a retired homicide detective named Chris McDonough ended up out in Hawkins County. He'd actually been working a different case in Jackson, Tennessee at the time, a homicide, completely unrelated. But he heard about Summer while he was still in the state, and he made the drive out to Rogersville to see if he could help. He ended up spending real time on that property, walking the terrain, talking to Candace, that's Summer's mother, and going through the house with her, room by room on camera. And a lot of what he documented that day has never really been broken down piece by piece, which is strange, honestly, because some of it is pretty striking once you actually slow it down. Here's where I want to start. Not with the basement, not yet, with the timeline of that morning. According to Candace's own account, and this is the version that's been repeated most often, the one everybody knows, they'd gone out that morning, come back, unloaded groceries, and then she and her mother, Summer's grandmother, went outside to plant flowers together near the grandmother's camper, which sits on the same property. Summer was with them. Within a few minutes, Candace has described it as somewhere between 2 and 5 minutes, maybe 10 at the absolute most. Summer went back toward the main house, and then she was gone. That's the version most people have heard 100 times. But here's the thing. In a separate interview, this was with a local news station sometime after, the grandmother told a different story about that same morning. And I mean a genuinely different one. Not just a slightly different phrasing of the same events. Her account was that after they got home, she went into her own trailer and took a nap. She'd been to the hospital that same morning, actually, to get medication for a knee injury. That part isn't in dispute. Both accounts agree she went for pain medicine that day. And according to her, it was only after she woke up from that nap that the flower story even started. So just think about what that actually means side by side. One version has the grandmother out in the yard, in real time, actively gardening with her granddaughter, digging, moving pots, doing all of that hands-on work in the same narrow window. Summer disappeared. The other version has her inside her own trailer, asleep, having just taken pain medication for her knee, and only emerging afterward. Those two things can't both be true. Not really. You can't be dozing off from a knee injury and pain medicine while simultaneously kneeling in the dirt, planting flowers with a 5-year-old. One of those things happened. Maybe both happened, just not in the order or not in the way either of them described. But as told, they contradict each other. And look, I want to be careful here because I think this is exactly the kind of detail that's easy to blow out of proportion. People forget things. People get details wrong, especially about the worst day of their life, especially years later when they have told the story 100 times to 100 different people. That happens. That's human. I'm not going to sit here and tell you a mixed-up timeline proves anything sinister on its own. But McDana, when he was reviewing this, and this wasn't years later, this was actually while he was standing there with Candace, filming, pointed at something else, something physical. He asked to see the garden, and what he found wasn't a garden. It was 2 pots with cactus in them, and dirt packed down so hard it looked, in his words, almost like concrete. No flowers, not one. Now, that's not on its own evidence of anything either. Plenty of people plant succulents and call it gardening. Plenty of people transplant a cactus from a smaller pot to a bigger one, and that counts in their mind as working in the garden that day. I don't think 2 pots without flowers is some kind of smoking gun by itself. But when you put it next to the grandmother's own account, where she says she was inside asleep when the flower planting supposedly happened, it starts to raise a real question. Not an accusation, a question. Which version is accurate? And if the gardening was really just moving 2 cactus pots around and adding some rocks, does that really take the 2 to 5 minutes Candace described? Or does it take longer? Or shorter? And where in either version does Grandma's nap actually fit? I don't have an answer to that. Nobody outside that family does. What I can tell you is that this gap between what one family member said happened and what another family member said happened about the exact same short window of time has never been publicly resolved. Not by investigators, not by the family, not by anyone. Let's talk about the rest of that walkthrough for a second, because there's more here that I think deserves the same kind of careful, unhurried attention. When McDana got inside the house with Candace, he asked her to walk him through what happened after the flowers, however long that actually took. Her account was that she came back in and her 3 sons were sitting at the table watching TV. She asked them where their sister was. They told her Summer had gone downstairs. Now, downstairs in that house isn't a normal staircase. It's what McDana described as more like a hatch, tucked under a countertop, somewhere around 18 to 24 inches wide, he estimated, at its widest point. He's not a large man, and he still had to duck and turn to get through it comfortably. Down there was where Summer slept, alongside her parents, actually. Her bed was right next to theirs on a mattress on the floor, on one side of a low dividing wall. On the other side were bunk beds for 2 of her brothers, and what McDana described as her toy area. He said the lighting down there was minimal, sheets of reflective material on parts of the walls, which cut down on what little natural light there might have been. In the second room, he said it got close to pitch black, except for the glow of a television. I want to pause here and say something clearly, because I think it matters. None of that, the tight space, the dim lighting, the modest condition of the home, is evidence that anyone did anything wrong. Poverty isn't guilt. Plenty of families live in cramped, imperfect homes and are loving, careful, safe places for kids to grow up in. McDana himself was careful to say that on camera. He wasn't there to judge how much money the family had or how the house looked. He was there trying to understand something narrower and more specific. How physically a 5-year-old could vanish from a space like that in daylight without anyone hearing or seeing it happen. And that's actually where his analysis gets interesting, because it doesn't point where you'd expect. The theory that circulated the most publicly for 5 years is that a stranger came up through the woods, sometimes called the dog trail in local reporting, snuck onto the property, got into the basement, and took Summer out the same way. McDana pushed back on that pretty directly. His reasoning was mechanical, honestly, not emotional, just logistics. For an outside stranger to pull that off, they would have needed to know, with real precision, the exact moment Summer went down into that basement. Not roughly, exactly. Because, and this is the detail that stuck with me, the only way in from outside was through a door that either had to be unlocked or the person needed a key. There wasn't a second entrance. So whoever it was needed to know the door situation and needed to know the timing, down to a very narrow window in a house they'd presumably never been inside of. On top of that, there was actually a work crew present down the hill that day. Candace had mentioned tree trimmers or line workers being in the area, which added more people, more eyes, more risk to an already narrow, already improbable scenario. Based on all of that, McDana said on camera, that he personally ruled out a random stranger abduction. Not because it's technically impossible, anything's technically possible, but because he considered the coordination and precision required too unlikely. I want to be really clear about what that is and isn't. That's one retired detective's professional read of a walkthrough he did years ago. It is not a finding from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. It's not a conclusion the Hawkins County Sheriff's Office has confirmed or denied publicly. Investigators have never officially ruled out a stranger abduction, and they've never confirmed McDonough's theory either. This is expert opinion, informed, based on real investigative experience. But it is opinion, not an official verdict. I think it's worth hearing, because he was actually there, and he does have real professional background in this kind of analysis. But it's not the same thing as a determination from law enforcement, and I don't want to blur that line for you. Here's the detail that honestly is the reason I wanted to make this video in the first place, because I don't think it's gotten nearly enough attention. At one point during the walkthrough, standing near that basement door, Candace told McDonough she didn't actually remember whether the door had been locked or unlocked on the day Summer disappeared. He hadn't asked her that. He says so directly, on camera. That was not a question he'd put to her. She brought it up herself, unprompted, standing right there at the door. Now, people offer up information without being asked for all kinds of reasons that have nothing to do with hiding something. Grief does strange things to how people talk. Trauma makes some people circle back to the same detail again and again, not because they're concealing anything, but because it's the thing their mind keeps returning to, the loose thread they can't stop touching. I want to say that clearly, because I don't think it's fair to treat every unprompted comment as some kind of confession. It isn't. But McDonough, watching it happen live, said it struck him as notable enough to bring up on camera. And when you put it next to something else, that in one of the very first press conferences after Summer disappeared, her father told reporters that the back door had been left open that day, it starts to form a pattern worth noticing. Because if the door was locked, the outside stranger theory basically falls apart on its own. And if it was unlocked or open, that's a detail somebody would need to have said clearly and consistently from day one. Instead, what you actually have is her own mother months later, saying she wasn't sure, not confirming it was open, not confirming it was locked. Just unsure. I'm not going to tell you that proves anything either. It doesn't, on its own. But it's one more piece sitting in the same pile as the flower pots with no flowers, and the grandmother's nap that supposedly happened during a gardening session that, according to her daughter, was happening in real time. Small things. None of them alone means very much. But you start lining them up one after another, and you get less of a clear picture and more of a fog, a set of small gaps that nobody in 5 years has ever gone back and closed. I want to mention one more piece of context, because I think it deepens the picture without answering anything. There's a photograph on the wall inside that basement. McDonough noticed it, almost by accident, during the walkthrough. A woman. He asked who she was. Candace told him it was her sister, who was also missing. That's Rose Marie Bly. She disappeared out of Wisconsin back in 2009, 12 years before Summer vanished, after telling her husband she was heading out to meet a cousin at a bar a few miles from home. She never made it. Her car turned up 5 days later, abandoned in a parking lot normally used by truck drivers, 30 miles from where she'd been headed. She's never been found. The case is still open with the Polk County Sheriff's Office in Wisconsin, and they've said on the record more than once that they've never stopped working it. Investigators in both states have said clearly that they don't believe the two cases are connected. Different states, 12 years apart. No shared evidence, no shared suspect. I'm not going to pretend otherwise, and I don't think you should either. This isn't a secret thread tying two crimes together, but it is true. It happened, and it means that Candace's mother, Summer's grandmother, the same woman whose account of that afternoon doesn't quite match her daughter's, has now lived through two family members vanishing without explanation. Her daughter and her granddaughter. That's not speculation. That's confirmed independently by two separate law enforcement agencies in two separate states over a decade apart. I don't know what to do with that fact except sit with it. I don't think it explains anything about Summer specifically, But it's part of the air this family has been breathing for a very long time, and I think it's worth understanding as context, even if it doesn't move the needle on what actually happened that afternoon in the yard. So where does that leave us with the actual question? The gardening, the nap, the flowers that weren't there. I think the honest answer is, it leaves us with a gap that's never been closed. Two family members. Two different accounts of the same short window of time. One says active gardening, happening in real time, lasting a matter of minutes. The other says a nap, brought on by pain medication, that only ended after the flower story had apparently already started. Two pots with no actual flowers in them, just cactus and packed dirt. Sitting in the yard is the only physical trace of whatever did or didn't happen out there. None of this proves foul play. I want to say that as plainly as I can. A contradiction between a mother's account and a grandmother's account, months or years apart in the middle of unimaginable trauma, is not the same thing as evidence of a crime. People misremember. People compress time in their heads. People say we planted flowers when what they mean is, we moved two cactus pots around for a few minutes, because in their memory and the emotional weight of that day, it all blurs into one general activity near the yard. But it's also true that nobody, not investigators, not the family, not anyone with actual authority over this case, has ever stood up publicly and reconciled these two accounts. 5 years later, there are still two different stories about the same few minutes. And the only physical evidence anyone's pointed to from that scene is two pots that, by every account, including footage of them, never actually held a single flower. Summer Wells is 10 years old now. If she's alive, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation released an updated age progression photo earlier this year, trying to show the public what she might look like today, because the image most people carry in their heads, the 5-year-old with the wide smile, isn't accurate anymore, even if it's the one that stayed frozen in everyone's memory. TBI Director David Rausch said, at the 5-year mark, that the agency never imagined this case would still be unsolved after this long. Investigators have said consistently that this remains an active and ongoing case, that every credible lead is still being evaluated. That's not nothing. 5 years in, a lot of cases quietly stop getting real attention. And by every public account, this one hasn't. But somewhere in that pile of small, unresolved details, the door nobody can confirm was locked or unlocked, the timeline that shifts depending on who's telling it, the flowers that were never actually there, is a version of the truth that nobody outside that family, and maybe nobody inside it either, has ever fully put together out loud. I keep coming back to those two pots. Small, plain, sitting outside a trailer in the mountains of East Tennessee, exactly where they were 5 years ago, as far as anyone knows. Nothing growing in them, just dirt and rock and a couple of cactus plants that were there before summer disappeared and presumably are still there now. They were never actually a garden. They were just called one on a day when a 5-year-old girl went outside for the last time anyone can confirm and came back in and then was never seen again. Somewhere between those two pots and that basement door, there's a gap in the story that's been sitting open for 5 years. Nobody's filled it in yet, and until somebody does, with more than another interview, another theory, another retired investigator walking the same ground one more time, that gap is going to stay exactly where it is, open, waiting. The same way Summer's case has been waiting all this time for someone to finally say the thing that actually closes it.